Hello, and welcome to Seance, our Deathtrap dungeon design stream here on the Adventure Archive. My name is Ryan, and as always, I am with the master of Deathtrap dungeons himself, Sersa Victory. How you doing tonight, Sersa?
I am hanging in there. It's been a busy couple of days, but I'm feeling good, feeling ready to keep moving on through our Deathtrap tomb.
Nice. So this is episode 6. And from what I know, no, what are we doing tonight? What's the plan for Seance and the Deathtrap tomb here?
Yeah, so in previous episodes, we worked out these things called Deathtrap dungeon moments, these iconic moments of a play experience that people sit down to have when they play a Deathtrap dungeon like the Tomb of Horrors, which is an inspiration for what we're doing for our module. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to design some monsters for our Deathtrap dungeon that help create the conditions for some of those iconic dungeon crawling moments. And then hopefully we will help people who may be watching the stream or listening to it get some tips, some takeaways for what they might do to create interesting monsters for their own dungeon adventures.
All right. Well, let's just jump right into it then. What's first on the docket here?
Yeah, so unlike some of the previous episodes, I do not have a 40-minute lecture to have you endure.
Oh man.
Yeah, and tonight we're gonna jump sort of right into it. What I want you to do for me, if you can, is pull up the Jamboard.
Got it.
Awesome. So like I said, tonight we're talking about monsters, and this is something that you talk about a lot in our previous episodes, Ryan, on how everything builds on the lessons that came before, and tonight's going to be no exception. So while there's not going to be a whole lot of new, there's not a 40-minute lecture that I'm going to subject everybody to, what we are going to do is draw on the things that we worked out in our previous episodes to help us come up with interesting, engaging, unique monsters for our adventure. Now, before we actually get into the exercise for tonight, I want to take you through sort of a hypothetical scenario, and then it's something that I've experienced a lot, something that informs my approach to monster design, and I want to get your thoughts on if you've had a similar experience to me. So, if you could jump over to the next slide in our Jamboard.
All right.
And you'll see here, I have a pretty cool looking monster image that I grabbed off of Google and a cool paragraph of lore. And this is something that, you would probably see in something like a monster manual or a Tome of Beasts or, a big old book of monsters. And you'll see the picture and be like, wow, this is really an interesting monster. And you'll see maybe some lore, like what's written here. So the Lamia priestess stalks the moonlit ruins of temples in search of wandering men to sacrifice to their goddess Urael. Their blade drips with the venom of the first Gorgon, and their crown is adorned with one emerald for each rival priestess she has devoured. They sing hymns only when flaying unscaled flesh from bone. So, like, oh wow, holy shit! Like, if you read something like this and saw this picture in a supplement of monsters, you'd be pretty stoked. Well, what is this monster like? So if you go to the next slide, you'll see often what I experience. So you have this really interesting lore, a paragraph up front in a monster's entry that really is evocative and makes you think about, oh, this is going to be really interesting for the players to interact with. But when you look at the actual mechanics of the monster, what you often get is something like this, claw, +5 to hit, 2d6 damage.
Yep.
Special ability, Poison Spit, DC 12 con save, or be dazed for 1d4 rounds.
Yeah, it's
sort of anticlimactic. So I want to get your feedback. Like, is this an experience that resonates with you? Do you know what I'm driving at with this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as you said, like, it sounds like the coolest thing ever, and you flip the page and I could I could change this picture to 50 different things, one of which is, basically nothing, and it wouldn't really change anything about the stat block at all. And I've seen this over and over and over again.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that I hope to demonstrate tonight through our exercise is how we can avoid running into this issue. How we can use the groundwork that we've laid with our dungeon's theme keywords, the verbs, the materials, uh, even some of the mapping that we did in the previous episode, how we can bring that really unique, flavorful foundation to monster design. So I have two monsters that I've picked for tonight's exercise. The first is going to be the sarcophagolem,
Fuck yeah.
and the second is going to be our fungus spider that
Oh,
we touched on a little bit in the previous episode. And for the remainder of this will be somewhat of a shorter episode due to some time constraints, but I think this will be a fun one. I'm really, really looking forward to it. Hopefully there are people in the chat who are looking forward to it as well. But yeah, on the back of this, we will get into some techniques that I use when I want to come up with a monster that is flavorful, and that more importantly, that the mechanics, the actual powers of the monster reflect the interesting lore. Because one of the things, and I want to get your opinion on this too, I often feel like the books for role-playing games are filled with very, very interesting lore or adventures. Like you might open up a dungeon module, turn to a room entry, and you'll see a paragraph or two of interesting things that did happen in the past.
Mhm.
And it's information that the players have absolutely no way of ever learning, or has no bearing on the actual encounter. And same with monsters. I often see monsters where they have this very interesting backstory, and it's all lore that only the GM will ever see. Does that make sense?
I mean, yeah. I mean, you just described the majority of my experience with 5th edition. I mean, let's get into it for the week. But yeah, I would say, real quick, and it probably is one of the things that really made me start moving away from 5e was the last module I ran. Like the whole module for was Princes of the Apocalypse. And it's basically like it's the return to the return of the Temple of Elemental Evil. But like when you play it, there's like multiple levels. So there's like there's like cults on top, and then there's like a fort underneath some land, and then you go down another level into something else, and you go down to the temple, then you go down like a geode or whatever. But like at each level, you're only supposed to interact with one of the 4 elemental cults, but they give you all of the information for all 4, even though they give you a pathway that says specifically you need to do this one first, and then this one, and this one, and this one. That's how it levels well. Right. So I'm like,
Right.
So then literally 3/4 of the book is unnecessary bullshit that you never needed to give me at all. And it's cool info that literally there is no way to ever tell the players ever. And it was so frustrating. Like that literally made me go, I will never run a 5e module like cover to cover or anything close ever again, because they do that so much. It's like, if you're just at that point, give me a little adventure and then give me a lore book just to read, because that's fun for me.
Yeah. Yeah, the trophy approach. Have a whole separate book that's just, the setting.
Lore. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Just give me some loot.
100%. Yeah. And so that's that we were trying to, throughout this entire series, help people understand that it's not simply enough to give your dungeon superficial flavor, but rather the mechanics of the dungeon, the rules, the systems, the effects that you create, all have to work in tandem to reinforce the theme and communicate it to the players. So what we will do is jump on over to the next slide in the Jamboard, and you should see our familiar friend here, the sarcophagolem. Now I've put a couple of little notes here on the page here, and I've split them into 2 columns. So on the left column, there are these yellow ones here, and then the pink one at the bottom. And on the right, you'll see we have spots for moments. So as I mentioned in a previous episode, to do what's called moment-driven dungeon design is to think about how every element of your dungeon, traps, puzzles, hazards, and monsters, how do they encourage, create, or lay the foundation for these kinds of iconic dungeon crawling moments to happen? And that everything that you design should be inflected through these moments. It's not enough to simply go, okay, I have a sarcophagolem. It's a large monster. It has 50 hit points. Does D12 damage. That's for me, that's where a lot of design stops, but it really shouldn't.
Mm.
So what we're gonna do here is step through each of these 4 different categories I have. So distinct feature 1, distinct feature 2, drive/lore, and environmental exploit. And we're going to randomly pair these off with moments from the generic moments table that I shared with you earlier, that those of you might be familiar with from last episode. And we're going to come up with powers. We're going to come up with abilities for our sarcophagolem that keys into these different aspects of the monster and these different moments. So you see at the very top here, I've already filled one in. And that's distinct feature number 1. So by distinct feature, what I mean is when I look at a picture of the monster, what stands out to me? What is something about this monster's visual, its appearance, its body, its behavior that makes it stand out? So the obvious answer for this one is the sarcophagus, right? It's a sarcophagus golem.
Mm-hmm.
And in a previous episode, we paired that randomly with the rescue moment. I think this is from our I believe our Death First design episode. So we had this really kind of cool interaction where it could swallow a player up in the sarcophagus, and another player has to rescue her ally from the sarcophagus. So we've got one already good to go. Now, what I want to ask you here, we have our next one here, distinct feature number 2. So looking at this picture, I mean, this is, doesn't have to be what it looks like in the final module, but when you look at or think about the sarcophagolem, what is another distinct feature of this monster that jumps out at you?
Okay. So like you just said, this is just a cool photo we found that gives us a vibe of kind of what we're going for. This isn't the creature photo.
Right.
Right. So for those like watching, this is vibes where as far as I know, I would love to commission a piece for this. But one of the things I really love is I love that angel statue on top of this specific picture. I feel like leaning into that vibe, because we've talked about it a couple of times now. I think we've decided for the most part to have those 2 NPCs, one of which seems good, but will actually be bad. Like will be like the quote unquote the bad guys. But the quote unquote bad guys will look very like very holy, So I love the idea of the angel statue, somehow a motif like that in the design that would really kind of have like that weird kind of like disconnect between like what it looks like, and what we're actually getting. So I think something like that would be something of the goddess, I think. Yeah.
And I love that you picked that, because that's what I zeroed in on as well. Particularly the fact that the angel is singing or chanting. Yeah. And that's, a little tip that I want to communicate to people watching or listening is, when I talk about distinct feature, what I really mean is just looking at a picture or a sketch of the monster. What about it is interesting that jumps out at you? Because what we're going to do is we're going to use this as a hook for an iconic dungeon crawling moment. And eventually these will all get turned into powers for the monster, like in its stat block. For now, we're just doing kind of a high level concepting. So now what I want you to do for me, now is where the fun starts. We've decided our distinct element number 2 that we're going to use as the basis for a power, an ability for this monster, is the Singing Angel statue. Let's pull up our generic dungeon moments table. And if this is the first time, if you're watching or listening, If this is the first time you're hearing about this, go back to our previous episodes where we talk about moment-driven design, and you'll get a full breakdown of what this table actually is. But for the benefit of for the purposes of brevity tonight, we'll just kind of dive right into it. But go ahead for me and roll a d4 and a d6.
All right. 1d6. Let's add on d4. So I got a 3 and a 6.
So that is a sabotage.
Okay.
So sabotage is a unique, it's a very interesting moment because it's specific to head-to-head tournament play. So I'm going to give you an option here. We can go down this path and design some kind of power where the singing angel statue potentially affects other tables playing at the same time, or we can re-roll. What do you feel like you want to do?
So what I don't mind doing, and what I really think would be cool, is to jot that down and maybe do that off stream, like you and I, as maybe part of this guy. But no, I don't necessarily think right now for this is one that because I remember, there's things in Rogue like that do this, and I remember there's things in Mailed Fist where things you do interact with other players, and I really love that aspect. But I don't know how much we're planning this as like a head-to-head tournament thing right now, so I don't know if that's really where we're at.
Sure, let's go ahead and bracket that and re-roll for me if you could.
All right, so I rolled at 24, which is closed loop, but I also feel like we already are doing that with this guy. Maybe I'm wrong, but isn't he already in like a travel loop that he is part of?
It is, and in fact, one of the things that we designed in a previous episode is that he breaks down the wall, allowing people to get through to other parts. So, and this is something that'll happen when you're doing the sort of random generation, is that you might roll things that you've already got plans for. So let me, third time's a charm. Let's give it one more roll.
All right. I got a 43.
There we go. So glorious death. So the glorious death iconic moment is exactly what you think it would be. It's a particular moment in the dungeon delve where the player slain by the monster has an opportunity to embellish their death in some gruesome or humorous way, right? So this could manifest as we just come up with like an incredibly gory, graphic, wild death for characters slain by the attack using the angel. Or we could put it in the player's hands and give a victim of the monster an opportunity to role play when they're slain in order to embellish their death. So, for example, one thing that I've done in the past is when a player is petrified by a basilisk, you give them an opportunity to role play and say, "Hey, tell me what pose you were petrified in," right? So
I think
what I'm picturing
you
here
also
is like,
you also did this in that the thing we ran in the Evo campaign at the very end, right? Where like the first time that someone was hit with like a specific spell or whatever, they literally didn't they have to like describe like a moment from their past that they were ashamed of or something like that?
oh yeah, absolutely. Like this is one of my favorite like design like little tricks is just basically give the players an opportunity to role play or answer a question about their character or their background and then use that to riff off of. And so what I'm thinking here, like with this combination of singing angel statue and glorious death, there's a couple ways that we can spin this. And I want you to let me know which one speaks to you the most. So the obvious one is I'm picturing the sarcophagolem has some kind of, I'm putting in air quotes, breath weapon that it can only use every so often. Like you roll at the start of the turn and then it shoots out like a cone of sound. and then
Okay.
a character slain by the singing angel statue, like the cone that shoots out the top, that has some kind of like glorious, gruesome death attached to it.
Okay.
Or what we could do is that when a character dies in the presence of the sarcophagolem, the angel begins to sing and something very glorious and gruesome and wild happens. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I like that because that's too. It's either something happens and she sings, or she sings and something happens. It's like both sides of the coin, but still related to
Right.
her singing, which I dig. So, I mean, talking it out, right? So this is clearly some type of worship piece for the charnel goddess, right? This is a rot, decay, and corrosion themed tomb. So I feel like the sarcophagolem of all things should be like, in my opinion, as we write this, so far to me, the sarcophagolem is the thing that I go, oh shit, like
Yeah.
that's what I'm gonna fucking remember. So I feel like this needs to be almost like the thing that, you know, that really exemplifies our themes and our goals and the things we wanted to do with this dungeon. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Oh, 100%. This is one of our iconic elements. Like
Yeah,
it's you know
iconic. That's it.
it's a candidate for the cover. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm almost like this. Yeah, I feel like that's definitely for sure. So I feel like we should really, really, like, it should be thematic to what we've worked on. So some type of corrosion or something. We've talked about them returning bones, because the point of this monster, because what triggers it is they think they found where they're supposed to put the bones back, and it's not.
That's right. Yeah.
So they, gosh. Well, the other thing too is we talked about this as almost being, not almost, it's a thing that's going to look so powerful they should probably run away. So
Oh, yeah.
honestly, smart players, which is a misnomer,
Yeah. Hmm.
will just stay away and not necessarily die to it. So I feel like giving it a power that will give a glorious death versus waiting for someone to die, which they might not necessarily trigger, feels like a better move to me, because it's more likely that it will happen versus like hoping that it will happen.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, I'm with you. Yeah. I mean, if we want
Okay.
this to really, really pop, yeah, it's probably more likely that the characters will be killed by it rather
Okay.
than happening to die. Man, I cannot talk tonight. I need to get a grip. But so I'm thinking like, so we have like a singing cone of sound breath, right?
Uh-huh. So we already
That
have a couple of breath
that
weapon options in the dungeon. Do you think so? Like, because I think the knight is gonna have a breath weapon too, right? We have the giant
true,
mouth
yeah.
that's gonna have like a, like something come out. Should we go specific cone of breath weapon, or should it be like area of effect, maybe a little something like anyone within a certain distance? I like the cone though because it makes sense for singing.
Yeah, I mean we can do that. I mean it's you know it's a breath weapon, like kind of, right? Like it's she's
Yeah,
essentially
yeah,
singing like sound. I'm picturing like sound waves, emanating out.
yeah, yeah,
Um
yeah, yeah. It can almost be. It doesn't. You're right. It doesn't. It doesn't have to be a cone. It could be a line. It could be all sorts of different things to tweak it a little bit. So yeah, love.
yeah.
Yeah, let's go with that.
All right, so we have our singing attack, a limited use power more than likely, an opportunity for the dramatic roll moment as well, because you could roll at the start of the turn, and on a 5 or 6 it does its thing. It sings. How does it kill player characters, and what way do we make the death incredibly brutal or humorous or even rewarding? Or what kind of role play opportunity can we give a character slain by this attack?
So okay. So I feel like we basically would be giving them what we are doing right now. So it's almost like, here are the themes of the dungeon. How is it killing you, right? But it could also be like, I almost imagine like a mix of those. Do you know those old RCA commercials where the dude is like sitting in the recliner and the wind is just like going at him. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Is it live or is it Memorex, you know?
Right. So I almost imagine something like that, but like, you know, where it's because we've talked about weathering, we've talked about corrosion and stuff, where it almost could like instantly age and or weather or whatever. So it's slowly like the flesh goes for like the eyes go, then the flesh goes, and then the bones go, and then like you just slowly like just basically are just like speed weather blasted away by it in layers as you corrode away. Someone in chat said, well, Andy said the sarcophagus is filled with corrosive sand. The player that gets stuffed in slowly and painfully fully dissolved by the sand, and the angel exhales corrosive sand. I feel like that's like a kill first moment though. And then Matev wrote, what if when the player dies their bones erupt from the corpse as an acid dripping angel that proclaims something to the party for departing?
There's a lot of good ideas here, a lot of good stuff. I like the idea of chaining this sarcophagus rescue power that we have here, where it traps a player character in the sarcophagus, and they have until the start of that character's next turn to free her. Yeah. If she fails, and this is where sort of like the ask questions part comes in, the character dies, is corroded, is dissolved. The angel sings something, proclaims something, and it has an effect based on either who was killed or how they answered the question. Like I'm thinking, like I'm writing on this note here on my paper, like I'm writing Hymn of Corrosion.
And it's great that it's literally powered by, it's not like it resets at dawn, it only gets it X amount of times. It's powered by a player dying inside. So technically it could have endless uses if players keep dying inside of it, or exactly, not necessarily at all. Yeah.
And if I'm just kind of spitballing here, but if I were running this or designing this, my first idea would be, okay, the player dies in the sarcophagus, their body is corroded, the angel statue up top begins to sing this hymn of corrosion that affects any creature that, within a certain radius that can hear it.
Right.
And I would ask the player, okay, describe for me, I'm totally freestyling it here, I'm improvising. Describe for me something in the game world from your character's past that you wish was brought to ruin. Something that you wish crumbled or corroded or was destroyed. And then depending on their answer, that would flavor the specific, rider effect. So let's say if the singing happens, the players have to make, saving throw versus breath weapon. They fail, they take, your requisite 3d6 damage, but then there's some kind of rider effect on top of it. Like that's something that I do a bunch in my new Dungeon 23 module, the Jaguar Princess one, where there are moments where, the players have to pick vices up front because they're pirates. And they got kicked out of their society because they had a vice like, the bottle or the pipe or things like that. And there are moments where if the character dies, there's some knock-on effect that hurts the survivors that's thematic to the vice they picked. I'm thinking something similar here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that a lot because you do this in a bunch of the other dungeons too. Because what's great is that when I've seen this before, you don't just go, okay, GM, now figure out what that means. A lot of times you'll have a list that's like, here are generally like the 4 or 5 things that it's gonna fall under in some way, shape, or form. If it was like a building, if it was like a person, it was like a this or that, like this is what it goes to. And if not, here's the default one. I really, really love that a lot because we get kind of both, like we get the glorious death part a little bit because of the person actually having to die inside. Then we're getting the player RP bit from them having to describe that, something brought to ruin. And then I love the rider effects because it could also it doesn't have to be contained to just a breath weapon at that point too. The singing could resound through the entire dungeon, and it could actually change something about the dungeon itself. Like if they
100%.
decide that like someone's old fort falls down, then maybe all the bridges collapse, and or if they, you know, X, Y, or Z. Like if they decide that it's a person that should go down or whatever, then maybe like all the people get like a bonus power or something, you know. So it could actually maybe not even actively affect the people right that moment, but realize as they go through that it empowered something else or changed something else later. So those are options too, like micro versus macro, like a now moment versus like a later empowering.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to, you know, pause here for a second and reiterate, you know, some of the different principles that we've been talking about throughout the series. You know, we have obviously the moments, you know, we're doing them right here, but we're also providing characters with an opportunity to role play, to fill in the lore of the world, to reinforce the theme. Again, that's what we're trying to do here, is reinforce the theme of the adventure and provide an entertaining, gruesome experience. Because again, if you were just killed by this golem as a result of a wandering monster check, you know, that could be fun or it could be annoying or boring depending on who you are as a player. But if I can't imagine somebody's not coming away from a game being like, I got caught in a sarcophagus golem and then I died inside the coffin and it basically ground my bones up like, you know, like a wood chipper. And then an angel statue sang it out like a sandblasting breath weapon. I mean, it's just, again, I mean, it's just about creating this really interesting, memorable, novel experience that it's hard to do when you're just kind of sticking to the vanilla stuff that we talked about. You know, if you want to go back one slide real quick, like we haven't even written any real game mechanics yet, but hopefully you feel like already this monster is going to be very flavorful, and that when you fight it, it feels like you're fighting a unique enemy, that it's reinforcing the theme, that it's presenting tough choices, it's encouraging iconic dungeon crawling moments, and it's giving players something to reminisce about, because we're building off of the tools that we've made in the previous episodes.
Yeah. You know, I just feel like a lot of people, like, I love a simplified stat block. I really do. I think it's great for like low level monsters, but for like high level stuff, I love options, you know. And I don't feel like a big old stat block, you don't have to use the whole thing, but if there's like specific powers or like powers that have limited use and stuff like that, it's okay to have a little bit bigger stat block that gives you options for different levels of what you need to do or tiers or something like that. And I just feel like people have a lot of people have a drive towards these super minimalist stat blocks. And again, I think that's fine for low level baddies, but once you get a high level bad guy, I really think that, you know, exactly what we're doing here, like thinking of those moments, thinking of the themes and things like that, and giving more options is definitely the way to go. So
yeah, and it's trying to, like we talked about in a previous episode, give the GMs as much of a leg up as possible when running the game, because, you know, I can see the appeal of extremely minimalist, not just stat blocks, but adventures. And I know there are people who swear by it and say, well, I don't need to have a bunch of stuff. If anything, you're jamming me up. Just give me like the most minimalist bullet points and I can spin that straw into gold. And maybe that's true, but for people like me who want to provide a product that is tuned to help GMs run like the most fun and engaging experience possible, in my opinion, you've got to go a little bit further with your design. That it's not enough to simply say, well, here's a sarcophagus golem, it has a slam attack, and there's a coffin in it, and then you do the rest. You know, because there are some GMs who can take that and be very successful with it. But in my opinion, I think a lot of GMs will, and in my experience as well as a player, as infrequently as I do play, you're going to end up with a very sort of, I don't know, generic feeling experience. And one thing I want to point out here, I was going to talk about it later, but you brought it up, is not every monster has to be this elaborate. There are some monsters that either, like you said, they're lower level or they're minions. They play more of a supporting role in a larger encounter. So you don't have to go hog wild and write like a, you know, half-page stat block. That being said, I would definitely recommend going through this process with even just sort of like minion type monsters and maybe only picking like one, right? So you might go
Mhm.
through and do
Right.
like, okay, what's an interesting feature or driver lore, but then really only pick one. That way you're not creating encounters where it's like 4 pages of stat blocks because every monster has like a million different things it can do, but you're still doing that moment driven design. You're still giving your monster some interesting, unique flavor. Um, it also depends on game system too. One of the reasons I really like Dungeon World and why I held over the monster format for Victory Basic is that you can have monsters with a lot of different powers because it's literally just a bullet point, right? You have like maybe 3 or 4 stats like hit points and armor, and then it's like, okay, the monster does this and it does this and it does this and it does this, and it's like one little phrase per bullet point. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas with something like 5e, I mean, this is what I experienced. Like I wrote something for Kobold Press recently, and I have a pretty constrained word count, and I tried to rein it in. I know I'm bad with complexity. It's been a problem in a lot of my stuff. I still used like half my total word count just for stat blocks, because it's a very verbose game. You can't just say, the monster sings or does this thing. You've got to like, okay, at the start of the turn within 30 feet, it's like, it's a very verbose.
Yeah. Hmm.
But so yeah, so if you're running up against a word count thing, it's okay to only pick one or two of these. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm feeling pumped. We've got a
One of the things I just wanted to touch on that you said real quick that
sure.
is we're one of the things that you've talked about is creating an adventure that people can play and creating a product that is good for a bunch of people, right? Like this isn't designed for me. This isn't specifically designed for you. It's designed for people to be able to pick up and play. And I think, there's a lot of people out there that will like read a module or basically, the people that want to like review and talk shit. And I think a lot of people miss a level of like objectivity where it's like, well, this isn't the style that I do it, so it's bad and it's wrong, versus
Right.
being like, I might do it differently, but I understand the process. I understand the appeal. I'm going to tweak it to fit me, but I get why this is the way it's written and why it appeals to the wider audience. And then I can tweak it. Like if you don't like a power, you don't have to use it. But I would still rather have the option, to come to the things that we're talking about than have absolutely nothing. And as I said, I think there's a level of objectivity for a lot of just, grognardy D-bags out there who just say this isn't how I did it when I was 14, so it's wrong,
Right.
versus being, again, objective about what they're looking at. So anyway.
Right. And the last thing I'll say about it, because this is my personal pet peeve, is seeing any kind of design beyond the bare minimum detail as like some form of railroading. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
even with the cyclic dungeon generation, I know there are people who pull back from it a little bit because it's like, well, you've got a part here where it's a one-way path, and you should never tell the characters they can't go. You know what I mean? It's like they see it as a form of contrivance, and it's like, okay, that might be fair. Like the dungeons are, to use a term we talked about in the previous episode, it's not a perfect sandbox that's been jaquaid to the max. You know what I mean? It's not a completely
Right.
open thing. There is sort of a golden path that you're kind of pushing the players through. Like I think there was, I don't read like reviews or commentary about my stuff, but I see, the refer links in my itch analytics. And apparently there's been a lot of people talking about cyclic dungeon generation on Reddit, which
Yeah,
I
well,
never read.
that's a mistake right there.
Yeah. And I didn't read it, but I can see the title in my analytics, and it's basically, can we learn about tabletop dungeon design from a video game? Now I don't know what the what the connotation is there, but when I read that, I'm like, why wouldn't you be able to? Literally
Right.
every other discipline of game design or design in general takes inspiration, but again, you just see sort of a reluctance, like, oh, video game, that's for degenerates. You know what I mean? Like that's for railroady babies, and we don't do that here. And it's just like, you know what? Don't worry about it. We're creating a fun experience, and I think the proof is in the pudding. You know?
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's there's no reason not to learn from, if the guy who created the game that the why am I blanking on it? Is it Jorah Stormons? Like, what if
Oh
he had
yeah,
done that?
yeah.
Yeah, what if he had just done that as the same concept, but had put it on a tabletop game version instead of putting it in a video game? They would shut the fuck up and it would be the same
Yeah.
concept. So
Well, it's so funny. I mean, this is, I know we're getting on a little tangent here, but this seems to happen a lot in my experiences. You get people who are like, "How dare D&D take inspiration from video games?" Like that was the big thing. Like when fourth edition came out, they were like, "This game is like World of Warcraft." When third edition came out in 2000, I was around for that. People complained that D&D was basically like Diablo. And so anytime there's any kind of change to the game, people are like, "Oh, they're diluting it." But it's so funny because in every case, like in the case of cyclic dungeon generation, Yoris writes in the essay in the procedural generation book that in part he took inspiration for the actual cycles from D&D dungeon maps. Like he looked at D&D adventures and was like, "Oh, these are cycles that I see in these adventures." So it's like, yeah, you can take inspiration from cyclic dungeon generation. It's a computer game because it has its DNA in dungeon modules from D&D. So it's very strange to me that, you know, I'm just kind of ISO there for a second. I apologize. I get real heated about
yeah, no, go off, King. People are
pop
dumb.
off and all.
Yeah.
So anyway, we got our uh third element here. So we had two, iconic elements of the monster. Now we're going to step into either the drive or the lore.
Okay.
So again, the
All right.
callback from earlier, this is where we take that interesting lore that often appears in the paragraphs that lead up to a monster stat block, and then how do we instrumentalize that into an interesting power? So I want you to do for me here, if you feel up to it, is help me come up with just one interesting bullet point of lore about the sarcophagolem. Like, why does it exist? What is it? What was it created for? What is, just something interesting that you might see in that lead up paragraph in a monster book, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. The spitball in here. From what we know about the sarcophagolem, right? So like, I've pictured it as it is originally, it looks just like a sarcophagus, and it looks very similar to the sarcophagus that they're looking for, which they don't know yet. But and then they are putting the bones in, which is a possibility of them losing one of the bones. And then it activates it. So we know that so far is that for some reason it was designed. Is it only the high priest bones or high priestess bones that go in the activated, or is it any bones? Who knows? But when activated, it patrols the dungeon. It will, during its activation, open up the pathway to another sarcophagus, and when a character goes inside it, it will be gloriously killed, which will then activate the angel to be able to sing. That's what we know about it right now. And we also know the angel is for the corroded goddess. So that's what we know. So, lore wise, I would say is there anything on the sarcophagus? Is it plain? Should we have some type of something actually like decorating it, or like it could almost even be like a little Easter eggy, or if they really look closely, like an answer to something later. Gosh, I mean, for drive, I feel like patrolling, putting a body inside the sarcophagus and then being powered by, like, feels like it's base core mechanical drive.
Yeah.
What are you thinking?
I like where you're going with this idea of, is there something decorating the monster? And, for the benefit of those who may be listening and not watching, the concept illustration that we're kind of going with here, the various tombstones and cover stones that this golem is made of have little engravings on them, like "Here lies whoever, R.I.P." There's a demon skull. I'm looking at on its leg, it's got like a winged knight, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that can tie into some kind of lore that will then turn into either a power or an ability, like a passive ability or something. But I'm thinking like, looking at it, it's like an amalgamation of several different sarcophagi and headstones and things like that. So I'm wondering if, and I'm just kind of freestyling it here. What if the sarcophagolem is actually an amalgamation of all of the graves and sarcophagi of previous priestesses who served the corroded goddess, and when they die, they get absorbed up into this golem.
I like it. I like it a lot. Especially that gives a cool opportunity so that, like, I mean, the sarcophagus is going to be a lot bigger than the sarcophagus itself. We kind of talked about it
Yeah,
just almost being like it's almost like a Venus flytrap situation, right?
yeah.
But there's more underground. So when it pulls itself up and out, there could always be something under there.
Yeah. Or we could even place the what they think is like the MacGuffin sarcophagus in a room with other like smaller tombs. And when they try to, and you got like the big prominent one and then all the priestess ones around it, when they try to interact with the main sarcophagus, the entire chamber like starts to rumble and all the sarcophagi form into the golem,
Yeah, so it's not already formed and emerging. It actually like pulls it in almost magnetically kind of and pieces it together, which
Oh yeah.
is another cool way that the pathway could open instead of even breaking a wall down.
Oh
Maybe
shit.
like there's like something leaning against the wall or something, and when that gets pulled towards it, it actually opens up something behind it in some way. Or like if it's like, if they're in the wall or something, when they get pulled out, it tears that wall down as it's reforming. Love that. So
100%. Yeah.
they could actually find lots of little bitty info scattered around, like the broken pieces of sarcophaguses or tombs or like whatever of the other priestesses, like, you know in that area.
Absolutely. So
Love
now
it.
what we're gonna do, like again, this is where often a lot of design stops, where this is an interesting paragraph that we can put at the beginning of the stat block. Like this golem is formed from all of the tombs of the previous priestesses that served under the corroded goddess. But that's not enough. What we want to do is try to take that lore and use it as a basis for a unique ability for this monster that, at least in some way, maybe indirectly communicates that lore and makes it relevant to the players rather than just trivia that the GM can enjoy on their own.
Right.
So go ahead, either you can roll or we can get the chat involved to roll the next moment here that we're going to combine with this interesting piece of lore that we've created.
Okay. I'll roll this one. We have one more roll, right?
Yeah, we'll have one more for this monster, and then we'll do another monster after this.
Okay. I'm probably gonna roll through this one, and we'll let chat roll through the next one.
Perfect.
'Cause I freaking love this one. Let me pull up the moment here. So I rolled a 1 and a 1, which is a hard choice.
There we go. I love it. I'm glad you rolled that one.
All right.
So hard choice is the most common iconic moment in a dungeon crawl, and basically we are asking the players to make some kind of trade-off between two or more different mutually exclusive options. Now, this choice could take a couple different forms. It could be just a pure trade-off between two equally significant choices. Both has their advantages and their drawbacks. Or we could do something like a risk-reward choice, where there may be a less risky but less rewarding option, or a more risky but potentially more rewarding option. We can do something like a now versus later choice, where the players can choose, and this is the context of like a monster ability. They can choose a modest punishment now, or hold off for a worse punishment later, but get an opportunity to forestall that. A couple different ways we can go with this. The easiest one, of course, is just the basic trade-off. Like, you have two different options. They have different pros and cons, but they're both equally, in this case, equally horrible, right?
Well, so quick question here. Does this tie into this? We've already said the activation of the creature is going to be, they're told numerous times you have to return a bone, right? You're trying to return the bones to the sarcophagi. They have to, we've already, one of the things we've established in previous episode is the cool mechanic of actually giving them like, physical, like paper product bones and stuff. And then each bone has like a power that helps them throughout the dungeon in some way. So if they lose one or use one or something, they potentially lose that power, right?
Yeah.
What if what they put, which bone they put in the sarcophagolem, because I feel like that's a hard choice right there, gives the sarcophagolem a different power. Maybe that's not necessarily this hard choice, but is that something we could play on a little bit, since they're already like sacrificing potentially or unknowingly or whatever one of the bone powers? We could give the golem that power.
We can definitely work that into the design of this monster. One of the things that I was thinking, and this is another technique I like to use a lot in dungeon design, is to ask players to narrate what happens and have them make a choice on how the story develops or how the fiction develops. So it's not something that they're like, that the characters are actually doing, but I'm saying I'm going to give you agency over the story for just this moment, and have you tell me, almost like I'm essentially like a choose your adventure book, like what's going to happen next in the story. And what I mean by that is, in this situation, what I'm picturing is they try to interact with what they think is the MacGuffin sarcophagus, the one they're looking for. It activates, and all of the tombs begin to, creep out of the ground, and they start to form into this sarcophagolem. And what I might do, again, I'm kind of freestyling here, but I might say, okay, I'll pick a player at random fighter. There are cover stones of one of the sarcophagi of these priestesses that form the fists of the sarcophagolem. And I'll give you an option between like two different priestesses that have different personalities or different abilities. You need to pick, tell me which priestess, which tomb becomes the fist to the sarcophagolem. Its melee attacks will have a different ability based on the life and teachings of that priestess. Does that make sense? I'm kind of working through it as I'm talking about it. But essentially, again, it's not like the players are actively like, they're not really doing anything. It's not like, okay, which lever do you pull? It's giving that player literal like agency over the story, but they still have to pick what happens next. In this case, we're surfacing the lore. We're telling the players, hey, these are all priestesses that came before the one that's, the one that remains in the dungeon. And depending on which cover stones get fit into the fists, that's going to affect its melee attack. That gives you a little flavor too, because you give them two little vignettes of like, this is this priestess and there's this priestess, and which one do you want to basically pick your poison,
Yeah, and I love that it goes straight to the melee attack, because that's going to be like the bread and butter right there. Like the angel singing is really going to be, if a character gets close enough, or if they do something. I also, just as an aside, I love the idea of like, if a player does go down to the melee attack, that there's some type of like caveat that like, if you die to a melee attack, you're picked up and put inside.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And then that automatically will fuel the angel attack, as opposed to waiting for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we've done here is, again, we've come up with an interesting bit of lore, and then rather than leaving it as just some trivia for the GM, we picked an iconic moment, in this case a hard choice, and used it to instrumentalize that lore, so that when the players engage with this monster in the adventure, they're going to get a taste of that lore, and not just as an info dump, but it's going to have real ramifications for how the play proceeds. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hell yeah. So why don't we take it home with our sarcophagus? We have one last one here, and this is environmental exploit. So this is advice that you'll probably see a lot of people give when it comes to monster design: is to don't think of it in isolation, but rather what is the context in which this monster appears, and is there something that the monster can do to interact with its environment to its advantage, right? So in this case, I want to think about, okay, what is some environmental detail about, I guess, the whole tomb, since this is the monster that's patrolling the entire circuit of the dungeon. What piece of dungeon dressing or environmental detail would the sarcophagus exploit as part of a power? So like I'll throw out like an obvious one. As the sarcophagus is making the circuit through the dungeon, and it's kind of slow, you might even have like a clock type thing where it's like, okay, every three, or we're doing OSC. Oh, we should announce that too. We're going to be doing this as old school essentials, primarily, and then we're going to work on some little conversion notes. But yeah, this will be an OSC module that we release. So in OSC, we've got things like turns. So every 3 turns, the sarcophagus kind of advances a quarter of a way around the circuit. My first thought is it's continuing to absorb like graves and sarcophagi as it moves, and it just keeps attaching them, and it's able to exploit that in some way, right?
I like it.
And of course, the longer the players linger in the dungeon, the more and more this like Katamari Damacy of death it's going to.
Oh my god, dude! The sarcophagus Katamari.
Yeah, I'm just gonna even put that as
that's so good. Oh.
And they say you can't get inspiration from video games for D&D. All right, so sarcophagus Katamari, and so we have this thing here where as the game progresses and players waste time, the sarcophagus is going to keep walking through the dungeon, gathering up more and more tombs. And let's go ahead and roll our last moment for this power.
Bad boy up right here. See what's going on. 41. It gets worse.
Oh, hell yeah. So that's one of my favorites. So with It Gets Worse, and I'm behind the scenes here, I'm reading from a list that I have in my online course, Dungeon Design Essentials Moments, which you can find at storytellingcollective.com. You can also do ! Sersa, and I believe it'll pull up my link tree, and you can go check the course out. And this gives a complete, super detailed breakdown of what all these moments mean and how to use them. So I'm reading from It Gets Worse for monsters. And here's a couple bullet points for that we can riff off of. So the first one is a monster transforms or gains new abilities as a result of the player's failing in some way. Triggering a trap causes a monster elsewhere in the dungeon to transform or gain new abilities, or a monster's missed attack causes a new environmental hazard to appear. I feel like for this one, the monster transforming or gaining new abilities seems to make the most sense to me.
Yeah. Well, it kind of depends. So like if we say that every time it completes a rotation, it can pick up more tombs. Yeah. So like even if so okay, so spitballing here. So let's think, I was thinking of something else when you said that too. Also is like if we make it where the breath weapon is more macro kind of that we talked about. That kind of feeds into that whole like there's like a change or something, right? Like the dungeon gets worse where like maybe every time it cycles back through that original room, the angel can also sing. So that's an option. Or,
I love it.
Or every time maybe it doesn't collect all of the tombs the first time, but every time it makes a loop, it collects another tomb. Like through that original like tomb room, it can like you said, Katamari up a couple more. So we could almost do like, what if there's not just like 2 priestesses? What if there's like,
Yeah.
5 or 6? And
Mhm.
every time, if it's 3 turns per quarter, so you're doing basically every 12 turns or something, when the golem goes through, you say, maybe you do hear a singing sound or you hear something throughout the course of the dungeon. I'm thinking the bell golem and stuff.
Yeah.
That that it went back through that room, and the players, whatever they're doing, have to, pick another priestess that this thing has been empowered by.
Hell yeah. And I'm glad you said that, because as you were talking, I had the thought to draw the arrow back to this lore bit of, yeah, we can continue to reinforce the theme of the dungeon, give players an insight into the lore about this monster, the history of the monster in the dungeon, while, you know, putting it in a concrete power that the players have to cope with. And I love this idea. And I'm even picturing like it could be a real time thing where, okay, it's a 4-hour module,
Yeah,
and
every 20 minutes.
yeah, like at a certain interval, like it makes the loop, you hear the singing happen, it pulls in more, and they have to pick a priestess, and they get to look through the different little like blurbs about each priestess, and oh god, if we pick this one, like this priestess was really fond of poisoning heretics. Well, shit, what do we what's gonna happen? And it's like, okay, you
Right.
picked that one, and now the fists are dripping with poison, so enjoy.
Yeah.
You know.
But not only that, especially for lore, if we want to sprinkle in a tiny bit of, how we're like kind of slowly revealing as we go through the dungeon that
Yeah.
they're the bad guys, even though they have this, presentation of holy good guys. So like the regular church. Uh, there could almost be a sprinkling of corroded goddess lore in there too, based on what the priestesses are doing, you
Yeah.
know, so that we can give like this almost like the background story, kind of like in bits that they piece it together with some other parts of the dungeon, on that it's the corroded goddess in the tomb or whatever, and that you're not doing the right thing, but not all just from this. But that's another spot we could like sprinkle a little bit of the story in.
Oh, absolutely. I think that'd be awesome.
All right.
So what we've done here, and we only have about 20 more minutes because I do have to leave, but I'm hoping you feel like we've created a very engaging, unique, frightening monster out of what are pretty simple. Like we didn't do any kind of like rocket science here. Like we just picked a couple, distinctive elements about the monster by looking at the picture and like, oh, that kind of looks cool. And we came up with a bullet point of lore and asked ourselves, okay, what's in the environment that the monster might interact with to its benefit? But by combining them with these iconic dungeon crawling moments, we've taken these little bits and pieces and turned them into what I hope you feel like are going to be really, really frightening and cool powers for the monster.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So in the last 20 minutes or so, I want to jump on to the next slide here.
All right.
And for those who watched the previous episode where we talked about map layout and did our cyclic dungeon generation, towards the end we came up with kind of an interesting idea for this like myconid fungus spider that dwells in one of the sarcophagi room, actually, that the players are looking for. And I wanted to wrap up tonight by coming up with some interesting powers for this monster as well, since I really enjoyed the idea. And we already kind of came up with one little aspect of it, where in the very first room there's the male, the smaller myconid spider, but if a character succumbs to the poison, their likeness gets sucked into the big like fungus colony that fills the whole dungeon, and then their face appears like on the actual spider. If you remember that was pretty sick.
Yeah. Love it.
So that's one of the distinctive features here that I have is, okay, it's the face of a player character gets added to the monster. So what we're gonna do, and I guess chat can roll for this, we're gonna combine this with a moment, just the same way we did with the sarcophagolem, and see what we can improvise.
All right, yeah, so chat, roll a d4 and a d6, and we'll go forward from there. I like the idea Oh, just D4. Don't do the one in the front. I like the idea too. Like if there's mushrooms growing on it, maybe the faces are actually like the mushroom caps.
Oh, I love it.
All right. So the D4 is a 4, and then a D6. You can go ahead and do. Yeah. Oh, so for another, it gets worse.
Awesome. So why don't we? We already did that one, so let's roll a d6 again. We'll keep the 4, but we'll roll a d6
Okay.
again.
All right. Roll that 6 again, Matev. Bring up these moments real quick, and then go through those. Oh. Ooh, I might need to turn the command speed down on that. So, a 6, so 46. Roll again and twice and combine.
Just so roll I'm going to call an audible here, because the only one that we actually don't have in that category we've done yet is role-playing prompt. We did It Gets Worse, we had Glorious Death. Let's do role-playing prompt. And I think that this one's pretty fun. So what we got here is we have a power or some kind of ability with this monster. It's got the face of a player character, and then there's some kind of role-playing prompt that happens. And as you know, the way I like to design things, it's never just pure role play, but rather the players, the way they role play has some kind of implication. So already I'm picturing like they see their dead friends, I'm putting in air quotes, face on this spider they encounter. And I'm guessing the face is going to say something to them. I mean, what are you thinking? What does this make you?
That's the first thing I thought was actually we could even throw it to the character that died.
Oh,
and
there
say,
you go.
Hey, what does your face say to the party?
Oh, amazing.
Because maybe he's dead, but it's fungus. So is it really all the way dead? So maybe there's the connection all the way back to their body. And it's literally like, hey, this is like the last gasp for you. What does the face of this mushroom cap on this spider say?
I'm getting goosebumps hearing that. I think that's going to be such a fun moment for players.
It's going to fuck people up.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
And again, something that they're going to talk about like after the game forever. Hell yeah. So moving these kind of quickly. You have distinct feature 2. So obviously what jumps out to me is, the legs, but we can go with like, the abdomen or some other detail. I don't know. What do you want to go with for distinct feature?
Okay, so I'm thinking spiders. I'm thinking mushrooms. So, if we already my idea or our idea is already to have like potentially the mushroom caps be like the faces. So like maybe like you could see the mushroom cap go out next to the head. So it almost looks like a second head kind of, but you can tell that it's like a mushroom with the face on the end of it. The other idea is potentially have the body itself be a mushroom or be covered in mushrooms. I really love the idea of the legs, but I'm trying to think of how to make the legs distinct in a fungal way. Does it have to be like a physical feature, or could it even be because I guess it would be attack later. Because I'm picturing like even the webbing isn't really webbing, it's more like
mycelium. We can do that. We can just do like mycelium sac, or mycelium, instead
of like webbing, because it kind of is webbing, but it's definitely not. Like when it hits, it doesn't have to like stop growing even. It's not like it's just like it webs and stops. It could almost like wherever it hits, it'll start like actively like growing out towards the other mycelium, and that's what keeps the connection of the mycelium growing. I mean, to me the biggest distinct thing could be is like the body looks like one giant spore or something, but that feels so, I don't know, like it just feels obvious. Like obviously when we draw it, it's gonna look mushroomy. I like the idea of the mycelium sac webbing, and then maybe we can flavor it up a little bit later.
I dig it. So let's get a moment in the mix there.
All right. I'm just gonna go ahead and roll this one so that we're cruising, and then we can roll on the last one there. So I rolled a 1 and a 6.
So
So
that
that would
is
be
a
yeah.
dramatic
Roll.
roll.
Yeah, we haven't had that one in quite a while, have we?
I don't think we have. So a dramatic roll is exactly what it sounds like. That there's some kind of very high stakes dice roll that's part of this power. This roll is made in the open. The players are told the stakes up front so that when you roll the die, they can react to it either with anguish or with cheering. So, an obvious one would be like the recharge roll at the start of the turn. Um, that can really get you some good mileage. With this one, I'm wondering if there's some other interesting dramatic roll that we can use. So I'm picturing, okay, it shoots the webbing out, it cocoons maybe a character, and there's some dramatic roll involved with that.
Yes. Okay, so the original one, when it died, that's attached. The cocooning. Well, okay, so I'm trying to think of dramatic roll. So what jumped in my head right away, I don't believe is a dramatic roll. But in the original one, you die, you become part of the Mygonid. But maybe she has more ability to do that more actively. So maybe if you get cocooned, there's only... Well, it could be a save or suck, right? So if you get cocooned within like a set number of rounds or whatever, you will actually burst forth as some type of like cocoon fungal minion. So,
I love it.
right? So it could be two things, right? One, it could just be like, you're cocooned, you're dead. Roll me a d6. That's how many turns before you come back and start attacking your party. Or that feels more, not so much dramatic, but I love the idea of like, if you like, you have to make this save, or like you will be cocooned and come and come back in a set period of time or something.
I love it. I like the idea of countdown rolls.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm picturing like it shoots out the mycelium webbing and it starts to transform you in some way. And what I might do is, okay, on your turn, on the first turn, roll a d6. On the roll of a 1, the bad things happen to you. You become fully cocooned and you emerge as like a fungus chrysalis thing. And then on turn 2, if you're still around, roll a d6 again. Now on a 1 or a 2, you're going to be cocooned. And then on turn 3, on a 1 or 2, so basically the odds of the player succumbing to the cocooning increase as time goes on, right?
I love that idea. Yeah.
Perfect. So I think what I'll do is I'll skip the driver lore
Mm-hmm.
for now because I want to do the environmental exploit, because what I'm thinking is there's two little environmental details that I think could be cool. The first one would be the dripping like ash acid, because it's, if you remember, it's in that room that's been kind of eaten away by the acid like
Yeah.
dripping down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's urns, or we could do its eggs, and I'm putting eggs in both.
I mean, I like more of like the ash as an environmental thing, not specific to this creature. Because already we have that idea of like them having the option to turn the water off, kind of, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
So I like the idea of the eggs a little bit. I do like the idea of the eggs. I think the eggs is where it's at.
I love it. And of course I put them in quotes because they'll be, we'll figure out some like disgusting,
Yeah.
way to describe it. They're not really eggs. So now what we'll do, so there's eggs in the environment in the chamber. Let's go ahead and roll our very last moment here and see how we can turn that into an interesting trait or power for the monster.
I've been having chat do some rolls, but we keep it in ones we've done over and over and over again. So this time, we got one we didn't get before. So that's a 2 and a 1, so it's a gamble.
Oh, this is cool. Oh, this is perfect. So a gamble is basically an optional thing that the players can do that could have potentially good effects or potentially bad effects. So here's an obvious, this is just an example. Yeah, eat the egg. So basically,
Eggs.
You tell the players up front, you can devour one of the eggs of the mycelium spider queen here, spider mother, and it's a complete gamble, right? It's not like a
Mhm.
risk reward. Well, I mean, it is a risk reward choice, but it's like it's a complete fucking toss up on if it's going to be good or bad, right?
Yep.
It's option. You don't have to do it, right? So
Uh-huh.
an example
Well,
of this would be like the deck of many things. Like, okay, you don't have to pull from it. It could have good or bad effects. It's up to
right.
you if you feel like you want to give it a go.
So I feel like two things pop into my head with that. I'm glad we both went straight to eat the eggs because
Yeah.
it's mushrooms, right? She's a
Hmm.
mushroom spider, so the eggs could be very mushroomy, right? And
Hmm.
one thing you definitely don't fucking do in nature is eat random mushrooms if you're not sure what they are. Like
That's right.
that's like very, very clearly like don't eat mushrooms if hey listen, for you guys listening out there, don't eat mushrooms in nature if you don't know what they are.
Right.
I love
Not
the
ideal.
idea of also having a roll table
Oh, 100%.
of different mushroom effects. Potentially, like if it's a D6, there could be like an actually really good one, an okay one, a pretty much nothing happens one, a that sucks one, and a holy shit, that's what you didn't want to roll one option on like a D6. So it's literally a toss up of what 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 egg you getting, what mushroom are you eating.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of reminds me of something I did for the library years ago. We were doing like monthly teen D&D games, these little one shots. And for the April one, it was Easter. And so I brought in a bunch of those plastic Easter eggs, and they were
Mm,
in a basilisk layer. And I kind of gave them the same thing, where it's I put like a literal a bowl of plastic Easter eggs on the gaming table and said, if you want to, you can crack open one of the basilisk eggs to get what's inside of it. And I put little slips of paper. Now, half of the eggs had like items in them, like, oh, there's a potion inside the egg, or there's, whatever. But then half of them were bad and they had like traps
mm,
on them and stuff. And that's kind of the same deal. Like they know up front they're
mm.
gambling. That's an important part of the gamble moment is they know up front that it's it's a toss up. But yeah, I mean, it's always really fun because you've always got players who are like, I'm like that. I'm like, hell yeah, I'm going to gamble. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I also love the idea of potentially doing a little research on this and looking up different mushroom effects. Obviously, one's going to be tripping balls for a period of time.
Oh yeah,
But I think we could easily find, six good and bad effects from mushrooms that could really tie to, somewhat to reality a little bit. That could be really fun to have. I love that. That was great.
hell yeah.
So good.
So I think we'll have to leave this really awesome spider monster at that.
Yeah.
But again, I'm hoping that both you, Ryan, and the people in chat can see by just doing a couple pretty simple things here, like just trying to identify interesting elements of the monster and then pairing them off with these moments. Like I'm already excited to run this encounter. And that's something for
Mhm.
me. I think we talked about it before. When I'm reading a module, that's what I want to feel. Like I really can imagine seeing. I think this is actually a Pathfinder monster. I just Google image searched,
Mm.
and I'm again. I don't like to like shit talk, but I guarantee you, if I looked up what this monster's actual stat block was, I'm sure it would be like the stat block we had up front. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I could be just talking out my ass here, but I can imagine it's probably like it has a bite attack and then there's poison and you make a DC 14 save.
Yeah.
Whereas with and I don't know, like it's not like I said, not every monster has to be like a super elaborate special thing, but seeing a stat block like that doesn't really make me excited to run it. But with this,
No.
like even though we
No.
haven't even committed to stat block yet, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be so sick.
Well, on also in kind of what we did tonight, we took a decent amount of time to do the sarcophagus, talking through the process, doing everything right, and then it was like, okay, let's bust out the spider real quick. We less than 10 minutes, and I'm just as excited for this spider as I am for the other one. And we literally like using stuff we had already planned from previous episodes and the themes that we want to use for this specific thing. Literally easily 5 to 10 minutes busted out something that's going to be an amazing encounter. So
Absolutely,
that, yeah,
it's gonna be awesome.
that's
So I'm like I said, I do have to get going here very shortly.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
apologize
yeah.
for folks who are used to sort of the 2-hour episodes. But hopefully people found this valuable. I hope Ryan, you found this valuable. It sounds like you did. Maybe there's time for like one question or one or two questions in chat if anybody has any. Otherwise, we can get into our plugs.
Yeah. No, I think, Matev's been here chilling with us here at the end, really helping us with the spider fungus thing. But I think you said multiple times you got to get out of here. So why don't we just go ahead and do the wrap? And before even that, what's the plan for next week?
You are not going to want to miss it because next week we're doing traps.
I mean, it's in the fucking name.
That's right.
Like it's in the name.
Yeah, it's going to be fucking monumental. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be really, really illuminating for a lot of people because I've got a really, really elaborate process for making traps. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can't. So this was officially halfway through. So we're about halfway done. So a lot of the things that we're going to be doing going forward, as far as I know, is like we're doing a couple other big parts of the dungeon, then a lot of refining going forward from here, and really getting to revisit some of this stuff and wrap some of the stuff up, which I'm really, really excited for. But again, trap is in the name, Deathtrap Dungeon. So and you do have an entire trap book. Yeah, that's going to be a fun one. Very, very excited for that. That will be next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Pacific. Maybe on time next time. We'll see. But if you're listening or if you're watching, we are on YouTube. You definitely want to check this out. Eventually, I'm going to get this to podcast. Sersa, what stuff did you put out this week? What can people look forward to? What you got here?
Oh yeah, so the main thing would be go to my itch page, sersavictory.itch.io. I put out my second Dungeon 23 module, Shrine of the Golden Jaguar. It is for BX. I also put out 2 adventures for the Shadow Dark RPG, which just did its Kickstarter today. I definitely recommend checking it out. It's kind of like a dark mashup of 5th edition and some of the old school games, done by Kelsey of Arcane Library, friend and colleague. She's one of my favorites, so definitely throw some support if you can. But I have an introductory adventure I wrote called Tomb of the Dust Queen, and then I did a Shadow Dark remix of Shrine of the Golden Jaguar called Shrine of the Jaguar Princess. It is a 50-plus page, free, multi-part sword and sorcery module. Will give you weeks of play. I'm really excited about it. But yeah, check it out on sersavictory.itch.io.
I'm the prolific amount of stuff that you put out that's always top tier is both inspiring, and I'm like, God damn it, if I could just get one thing. I have a little thing that I made a long time ago when me and Sersa were first kind of getting chatting and stuff, and it literally was this little tag that I would leave up on my computer screen somewhere that said just do like 1/10 of what Sersa does. Always putting out fire content. You definitely want to check those things out. Shadow Dark looks really interesting. You definitely, I think it reached its funding goal today. I'm not sure. I think it's in the hundreds of thousands now. So I think some people like that. So you might want to go check that out. As I said, we are the Weekly Scroll. We are the Adventure Archive. I also have the Weekly Scroll coming up on Saturday with Nevin Holmes. We're gonna get fucked in space. Well, no. So you're in space and everything's fucked. So we're gonna be doing a interview and critic cut for that. And Thursday we're gonna be doing episode 2 of Cyborg. So if you're watching this before that, every Thursday for a couple of weeks we'll be doing that. And if this is in the past, go check out our Cyborg stuff too, and check us out on the Weekly Scroll. Myself and Hunter, who's also in Cyborg, on the Weekly Scroll. But that is the pitches for this. We still have 6 more weeks of this. And sooner than later, I will be putting this up on podcast. So if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for that. If you're listening on podcast, why don't you go to our YouTube, The Adventure Archive, and hit that subscribe button. That'd be great. That is our episode for tonight. Sersa, as always, you are wonderful. This has been so much fun. Chat, super appreciate you being here. And we will see you all next week.
It's been a blast. Thanks, everybody.